have studied tribalism in the context of politics, and it is true that when you have people who identify strongly with a political in-group on the left or right, they do tend to adopt a full set of corresponding beliefs and attitudes and values, and they start to become very afraid of contradicting beliefs that are strongly held by their in-group. And one thing that I find to be particularly interesting is, so you're talking about a specific subset of people. So there are people who will kind of go all in on an ideology, and they will pay a huge price to go all in and to signal their commitment to the group. And that kind of thing does happen, of course, and sometimes it can be absolutely devastating, the consequences of going all in on that ideology. And sometimes, as you're pointing out, it's not even always the person going all in who's paying the price. In the context of like people using their children to make a political statement, which has happened. It can happen with gender identity, but it happens with other things too. I remember there was I think it was a picture of a girl. She was young, 1 or 2 or 3 or something, and she was holding up some sign about her white privilege. And you're just like, this is like a little tiny girl, and she's already like being told that she's not a good person because of her race. And so, granted, I'm sure that little girl grew up fine. I don't know if that's going to be a traumatizing. It's certainly not a permanent change to her body. But parents do use their children to kind of get status for themselves. But what's interesting to me is that happens on the extreme ends. And one thing that happens with people who are identified with their political in-group, but they're not moderate, and they're not like in the middle, but they're also not like they're not chugging all of the Kool-Aid, but they get really intimidated and afraid to speak up and acknowledge when their own group is doing something that's like too extreme. It's gone too far. So you get like large chunks of people who actually all share a more like moderate perspective on an issue. I think gender identity is actually a really good example, because a lot of people on the left, they would never say so out loud, but they do have more moderate beliefs about issues surrounding gender identity. But they're too afraid to say anything because they're afraid of getting, as you're talking about, afraid of getting canceled from their own group. And one thing that's really central to human psychology is a strong fear of being ostracized. And what's interesting about this strong fear of being ostracized is that very, 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 very long time ago, if you were ostracized from the group, you might die. You can't live in the wilderness on your own in the cold without the ability to like get all of your own food and clean water, get taken care of if you get injured. And so ostracism, like our brains evolved to be really averse, or really like trying to avoid saying anything or behaving in any way that potentially could get us ostracized from our social group. And we still have that fear, but we now live in a world where, honestly, if you get I'm not saying people don't get canceled or whatever, their livelihoods aren't affected. They are. Some people actually have gotten canceled like so extremely that they've taken their own lives, which tells you something about how important not getting ostracized is to people. More commonly, what happens is if you get ostracized from one community, you just get taken into a different community. Like you can find new people. It's not the end of the world. You're not going to die. It might be really painful. You might be really stressed for a while, probably similar to like going through a breakup. Like there's a grieving process. But you can still land on your feet in the end. And so I think people are really afraid of contradicting beliefs in their own political group that they think have gone too far, they're too extreme, and they know they're too extreme, and they know all their close friends think they're too extreme, but they're still afraid of the extremists in their group kicking them out for not being loyal enough, like political group members. And so I think what's interesting to me is that these people that we associate with, being in these political groups often do have more nuanced beliefs and values and perspectives than we realize, because everyone's too afraid to say so out loud, and everyone just repeats, what the extremists say is right. And so we're giving so much power to the extremists within our own group when probably most of the time not the people to be listening to.
I mean, if someone could just play that back, if they're in the middle of two illusionary halves, because I believe that all of this is happening for our evolution. I truly believe that. And if you look at behavioral evolution and psychological evolution and technological evolution, I think it was Ray Kurzweil that was proved Moore's law 10, 20 years ago. The technological evolution was a hockey stick. I mean, it just went through the roof on the data set. But human evolution, and even the way that our brain and our prefrontal cortex and even the limbic system for reward and ostracization from tribe, that hasn't changed that much, Cory.
It's a really long time.
It takes a super long time for our hardware and our wetware to actually adapt to modernity, yet modernity is going at such a breakneck pace. This is my deepest concern. I'm not necessarily worried about it to the point where it keeps me up at night, because I know what I'm focusing on for my family, with our podcast, with my business, and with our vision and message. And that is, I know that when we have strong values about family and about human health, emotional health, and really just practicing this art form of disagreeing with someone, hearing them out, I just feel like we've lost the art of navigating conflict. We've lost the art of hearing someone else's perspective. You know, that's why in high school they have debate teams, right? I'm sure you were on a debate team in high school. But this approach to be able to even hear someone out is really what I think our focus must be on. Because if we focus on what we don't want, I know it's a very reductionistic way of explaining it, then all we're going to continue to get is what we don't want, right? To quote many spiritual teachers, energy flows where attention goes. So my question to you in this realm of, I guess, both science and spirituality, that's where my question is coming from, and really morality, objective morality for human beings and families, is it really just a focus on building strong families, having great virtues with mothers and fathers, being mindful about technological use, and really imbuing our children? That's the turning point, because it's very hard to change the mind of an adult where the thoughts have already been baked in for so long. Do we start with the kids? Do we start with the teenagers? Where do we even begin?
Yeah, that's a good question. One thing that I was thinking when you're talking about, not being willing to listen to other people is that there's the reason for that, I think, is that people use this guilt by association strategy. So I've seen this in the adversarial collaboration project that I'm running, which is that people will actually judge people on their own team, people on their own side of a particular conflict. If someone on their own side is willing to engage with someone in an opposing side, they will want to ostracize that person. That person's viewed as not a committed member. And so it's this thing that we would view as virtuous in many contexts. There's, oh, wow, they're willing to listen to people who disagree with them. They're willing to treat people with civility. They're willing to engage with new ideas and new information. That should be viewed as a good thing. But it's viewed as a bad thing from the in-group perspective. So you're a traitor now. You're making it look like we should be listening to those bad guys. And so people can actually get punished for that. And that's one problem. And so we do need to find a way to make it so, well, do we need to find a way? There might not be a way to do it, but it would be helpful if people actually did value engagement with different perspectives and people who disagree with them more than they currently do. And I don't know how you change that. When it comes to, there's a lot of research on parenting. And although obviously to a certain degree, parenting matters a lot, I think when you're in a certain cultural context, it's hard to, it would be hard to instill some value in your child if that value is going to be punished by their peers. Because just like all humans, they're going to want to be accepted by their peers. They're not going to want to be ostracized either. And it would be really hard to tell someone, oh, we'll just care less what people think about you. Who cares if you're not popular? Who cares if people don't like you? Who cares if your best friends won't talk to you? You can't do that because you're fighting human nature. And so I do think focusing on the culture is important. I think being kind to people, if we're capable, people who disagree with us and people who agree with us but are engaging with our intellectual opponents, don't kick them out of the club just because we feel like they're threatening the core of the in-group. But this is not easy for people. And not only is it not easy for people, I'm not even sure all people are capable of doing it. But there's variation. Some people are more capable of doing it. And so what I would like to see is those people rewarded more and punished less, because that's something that we can't control a little bit.
What makes a person more capable of having an open mind in conflict resolution than others?
There are a lot of debates about the person in this situation. How much of this is individual differences versus is there anything we could do to this social environment to make people more capable? And I do think there are things you can do. There's a social environment. If you knew that I wasn't going to punish you for engaging with other information, then you'd feel freer to do it. So there is a social component, of course. But I also believe that there are individual differences. So probably something we can all relate to, or at least I certainly can. Sometimes we're engaging with like a piece of information and it doesn't feel the same as other information. This is specifically something we don't like, something we don't want to be true, something that contradicts our beliefs, something that comes from the out group. And your heart starts beating faster and maybe your face gets a little hot and you can tell you're having like a physiological reaction to that piece of information. And that's crazy because it's not like you're face to face with a lion, but we have a physiological reaction when we're confronted with information that we might feel challenged by. And that to me is super interesting. And people will feel that to different degrees. Like some people, when they're confronted with something they don't want to believe, and it's a really important belief to them, they may as well be face to face with a lion, right? Like that's how intense that feeling is. Whereas some of us, I'm not putting myself in the category of perfect virtue by any means, but some people, when they're confronted with that information, they can kind of acknowledge, oh, I don't like this, but okay, too bad. I'm going to read it anyway. I'm going to talk to this person anyway. I'm going to engage in this issue anyway, and kind of push past that. So I think we can focus on like the situational context and what we're doing to pressure other people to self-censor or to avoid contradictory information. But I do think there are also individual differences, and I suspect some people just, to them, like the costs are too high. The fear is too great. And I'm not sure there's a lot you could do. Somebody who's like, we probably all know these kind of people. Someone who's really, really, really dogmatic. They're the person who gets in a fight with every single person who challenges them on this one specific thing that's really important to them. And those people, everyone else is going to give up on them anyway because, well, last time I tried to talk to this person, they screamed at me and hung up the phone and we didn't talk for a year. So I'm not going to bring that up again. I think there are situational components, but I think there are also individual differences where some people are better able to have disagreements in a calm, civil way. And other people, they just get into a screaming match and ruin their relationships over these beliefs.
Well, and that's what I want to push back. Actually, I don't know if I'm pushing back, maybe just pushing on this concept of parenting.
Oh, no, it's a lion.
I know. Did you feel your heartbeat increase? So the way I see it, I struggled with hypervigilance for a long time. My mom was manic bipolar and my dad left home very young. And so I had to really do honest work to train my nervous system through many modalities, which is essentially a gift because it drove me to do this podcast, where I could show up with my children and my family and the people that I love more emotionally regulated. And that emotional regulation comes with a huge reward for everyone, including me, because I don't get sick as much. I have greater health. And it's something that I had to practice over time. There are some people, though, that are just innately born with this skill. Maybe they don't go through as much trauma. You yourself, I think you were 7 years old and you were like, the Santa Claus isn't real, so you've always been a bit of a contrarian in your life. So maybe looking back on what you do now and also your childhood and your scholastic endeavors, there had to have been something in your heart where you thought to yourself, I'm going to do something noble to bring people together that have opposing views. I'm going to be a contrarian in the world, not because I'm a rebel without a cause, but because you would like to be a rebel with a cause. Has that ever come across your psyche?
I assume that I might be a little bit less concerned about fitting in than other people. And I only assume that because from relatively early on, I was willing to say things that my group didn't agree with. And and I have paid a social price for it, but I do know I care. Like, I know that when a large group of people dislike me for a particular empirical belief, it really does bother me. And when you feel that you're bothered by it, you learn something about yourself, right? Because I'm aware that I'm not in a dangerous environment, and I'm aware that not everyone has to like me, and I'm aware it's perfectly fine if tons of people hate me. But being disliked doesn't feel good. But I think it doesn't feel good to a greater degree for some people, maybe for most people in my case. And then for some people, maybe they're okay. They really genuinely are okay with it. But it's a weird thing because it's like, on the one hand, this can make you really open to other people and other ideas. But maybe on the other hand, it makes you a little bit of a curmudgeon because you're like, well, I'm going to like engage with the people and the ideas that I think are, interesting, even if that means that not everyone's going to love me. And maybe there is something to being like so sweet, so nice. You won't say anything that upsets anybody or engage in anything that anyone finds distasteful. That's a different kind of virtue, I suppose. But you're probably right in that you probably can work on it. But I think the will to work on it also would be an individual difference. Like, I think not everybody would want to work on it. Like, some people are so sure of their own like righteousness that to change would be bad. Like, to consider other people's perspectives to calm down in the heat of the moment, that's actually undesirable. So there might have been something in you that was already like open to that to begin with that led you to pursue change. And I don't think everybody would want to change. So,
whoa. If you enjoyed that one you just saw, you will love this one on the screen. Click it and enjoy.